is well known for its diversity. Diversity in its scenery, recreation, art, and cuisine. I'm Katriina Cotten, and welcome to Corner BC, where we search out and showcase inspiring stories from seemingly average BC residents who have struck out on their own to create their own destiny and success. Join us as we take you on a cultural and scenic tour of Vancouver, while we also pull the curtain back and give you a glimpse of the world of digital special effects. For decades, Vancouver has long been referred to as Hollywood North. Literally thousands of TV shows and movies have been shot in our scenic city. Add to that the easy and close access to some of the most diverse urban backdrops resembling cities like San Francisco, New York, and Seattle. And one more thing that makes Vancouver a hub for TV and film is the size of our visual effects industry, aka Vancouver's VFX pool, which is currently the largest in the world. And second only to Hollywood itself for filmmaking. I guess that must be a new addition to the script. Just one sample of Caleb's unique but fascinating talents. I'm here in South Vancouver, standing under this golden hollow tree on the corner of Cambie and Southwest Marine Drive, near the home office of Caleb Bannerholt, a young and talented junior digital effects designer who aspires to be an accomplished filmmaker. And here comes Caleb. Obviously, even at first glance, it is easy to see that Caleb is a unique and talented individual. In addition to working on a budding film career and unicycle prowess, this VFX specialist identifies as gender diverse. Hailing from a small community in Alberta, Caleb loves the freedom that moving to Vancouver has provided, both professionally and in terms of the support which the sizable LGBTQ2S+ community affords here. Full disclosure, we asked what pronoun Caleb prefers, to which apparently Caleb has no preference. To keep things simple, that he or him is more than fine. But that said, she, her, them, or they are also fine depending on the situation.
I grew up in Airdrie, which is just outside of Calgary, Alberta. I was homeschooled for my first 4 years of grade school, and I think my other homeschool friends were all into engineering and robotics. You know, a lot of them went on to do some really cool robotics things. One of my friends had an internship at Google a couple summers ago. So these guys are very smart guys, and I felt like I was always trying to keep up with them, which was wonderful. But we built Lego robots and moved into little aluminum robots, and then these big 120-pound robots for a competition called FIRST, FRC, FTC, FLL, that was held in Calgary and in Edmonton. And eventually we went down to the States a couple times to compete on a world scale with teams from all around the world. It was super cool. I think that's what got me into like the technical side of things, building robots, not only physically with the metalworking and woodworking and all the Lego stuff that we were doing before that, but we also had to do something called CAD, which is computer-aided design. They use that in engineering. We had to 3D model our robot that we built for a high school competition, and that's what got me started on 3D modeling. So from building all these robots and stuff with my friends from high school and from earlier, I guess that's what got me into the technical side of things and 3D modeling. Throughout that, I learned how to video edit. I remember one day at about the age of 11 or 12, my parents took me to the Apple store, and they had a 1-week-long day camp at the Apple store called Apple Camp or something like that. And they were showing off the video editing software that they had on the Macs at the time. Every day, we got to play with the Macs in the stores and do some editing on whatever videos that we were able to take from phones or cameras and stuff at home. Some kids made stop-motion Lego films. I think I made my first unicycle video. That was on YouTube for a little while. So I guess from this video editing boot camp that I did at the Apple store back in the day, it got me on this binge of wanting to edit and make new videos. You know, editing is kind of like music, where it's all about timing and pacing and keeping people's attention. And that really intrigued me at the time, as well as visual effects. So things that are made in the computer that appear like magic to everyone that doesn't do it, which is how I got to where I am now. But at the time, I was using pre-keyed footage from websites and stuff that I found to put everything from explosions in my hands to sparks on broom fights that I did with my little sister. I remember in high school, we had video camera class where I made a spaghetti western style video with a couple of my classmates fight with office supplies with sparks and fire, and I think it ended with one of my friends throwing a marker across the classroom and having the marker stick out of the other friend's forehead as he like fell against the whiteboard and drooped. I remember growing up, I'd sit in front of the TV and watch movies like Life of Pi or anything by Steven Spielberg, Martin Scorsese. George Lucas is a huge influence for me. So near the end of high school, I think I came to the conclusion that I wanted to work in film and animation, possibly, but definitely working with movies. But I toured a couple schools in Calgary looking at their film programs, and I wasn't all that happy with them. I was excited to see the cameras, and I was very excited to see an upgraded version of what I have at home with my little dorky Apple laptop and Final Cut Pro I think I had at the time. That was one of the big purchases that I made. But a friend of mine in high school told me about Vancouver Film School, which, after looking at their website, they have amazing marketing online. Just really inspired me to come and check it out.
Caleb went on to enroll in the Vancouver Film School and pursue his dreams of becoming a VFX artist and ultimately a filmmaker. Here is a sample of one of his projects early on in his VFX journey.
I made this video as another part of my final project for VFS, and just to try and make a large-scale simulation of some kind. The way this simulation works is I start out by simulating a bunch of points, just moving in the turbulent motion that I wanted the tornado to, and then I copy a smoke simulation to it afterwards and add the dynamic, fluid ripples and smack after the fact. All these little particles that are floating around the tornado are leaves. You can't really tell because they're so small, but they're all 3D modeled leaves that I had as part of the simulation. A little bit of camera shake, a little bit of rain on the lens, and I think it sells the effect pretty well. When you're making a demo reel for visual effects, you always want to show some sort of reference, or it helps to show a reference. That's a real tornado. That's grabbed from a video that I found online. This video was part of my final project for VFS, where on top of making a tornado and whatever else I showed on my grad day, I also decided to make a short film of my own in the last 2 months of school. I think this is probably where my ADHD and neurodivergent tendencies showed a little bit more, but it taught me a lot about why I got into CG in the first place. I really like experimenting and playing around with things on my own, and I've always learned a little bit better when I can just be creative and, try and fail as opposed to a classroom setting. So this was definitely that for me. I don't know if I did it super well here, but at the time I was very proud of it. Another thing that I noticed is this brick texture that I put on the building is one that I made on my little laptop from home. This dirt looks really good. The pot, not so much. I'd probably add a couple more dings and scratches. It just doesn't look perfect yet. But a spotlight or some sort of light that shows the glistening grooves that you see in the wood here, the dirt and the grime and whatever this is on the pot, looks a little cartoony, but maybe it fits the style of everything else. I made the flower in Cinema 4D because I wanted to learn how to use a new piece of software that they didn't teach at the school on top of the ones that I was already learning. Cinema 4D is used a lot for motion graphics or commercials or those satisfying videos that you see on Instagram. But I wanted to learn how to make a blooming flower in that, and I found a tutorial, so I did it. My apartment at the time, which was on Hastings, and I just thought it'd be really cool to put a flower on my windowsill and write a contrast between the beauty of the flower and the idea of an apocalyptic window. I was pretty proud of this water at the time because it wasn't a real water simulation. It was just a height map that I'd used. So essentially what I did is I put a plane down, a flat surface, and made it really high quality. So it had a lot of squares breaking it up, even though it was a perfectly flat surface. And then I stuck a noise to it, which is just a black and white image that flickers or kind of morphs a little bit. And I use that to change the position of the plane. So it looked like waves and whatnot, kind of like water, but not quite. If you look closely, it's just going up and down. But my favorite shot in this whole thing was this flower petal falling down. I did a really stiff cloth simulation with this. So the petal doesn't actually really move or deform at all, and it doesn't look like it does. But with some really low gravity to make it look like it was slow motion, I was super happy with how dramatic it looked. And I took a lot of time trying to make the flower petals look as high detail as possible because I wanted to make this look beautiful. You can see a little bit of dewy drop that I put on the petal. I don't know if there's any more dewy drops anywhere else on the flower. yeah, this was a cool project. When I first came to Vancouver, I came with a drive wanting to prove to my family that I could make it in the film industry, that it was a real thing, and that I don't have to move back to Alberta. And I guess one of the biggest things that I learned in my first year here is that there's a huge environment shift from Alberta to BC. It's a lot more inclusive in BC. In Alberta, my family was very conservative, and it gave me a free space to learn to express myself in ways that I didn't know I could before. It's part of the reason that I dress the way that I do now, is just because I can. I didn't feel able to dress this way growing up. So I'm making up for lost time. Some of my favorite conversations that I have with friends of mine here in Vancouver are the ones that live this unconventional, against the beaten path lifestyle. I have a friend from California who's spent, I can't remember how many years, collecting dead animals on the side of the road, turning their bones into jewelry, and going to farmers markets to pay her rent and all this other stuff. Now she works as a texturing artist on animated films in North Van, which is very different than one of my artist friends, Aaron, who's working with me on my movie. They came out as non-binary last year and have started taking steps towards that, which is super cool, and I've loved being able to support them through that. They're working as a lighting artist in children's television here. Their family is very accepting, more accepting than my family. Something that I wasn't able to think about growing up was masculine and feminine energies, and that you aren't just the binary person that you are born to be. You can be any gender that you want. And everybody has a mix of a masculine and feminine energy within them. And it's just finding whatever balance you feel you are. And it's been really inspiring talking to a plethora of artists in Vancouver that are all going through the same anxious experience of finding themselves, which we never really do. But yeah, no, that's one of the reasons that I started working on my film. Is it's a story about a young man who has his routine and his things that he does every day, and his routine is shaken up by this non-binary person who just shows up in his life, and the two of them have to go through this pandemic level event. So I hope that it's very telling of the times, entertaining, pushing the technology, and just self-reflective on the story that I live every day.
The novel coronavirus has made its way to the United States with a confirmed case.
There's currently no vaccine outbreak.
The world economy has been rocked by the
Protect yourself and life from coronavirus.
Like for so many, the pandemic slowed the progress of Caleb's career. But it didn't stop it. Until things would open back up, Caleb kept the faith by continuing to keep up with the creative flow by working on just for fun projects. Despite not having the same access to higher-end hardware and software, which was available at the film school or at a film industry shop.
This video I think I made recording on my old phone with this cheap little laptop that I had bought from a friend for a couple $100. It was at the beginning of the pandemic, right after graduating school, and everything was closed down, so I couldn't find a job anywhere. So I was quarantining in my little apartment and making goofy videos from whatever little computer technology I had at the time. I filmed it from my phone here, and then where it freezes on like me looking at my thumb, I froze the screen and just zoomed in, replacing my thumb with a higher quality thumb that I had taken a photo of. And then later I had replaced my thumbprint with a higher quality thumbprint that I had taken from my own phone, but probably this was a picture from the internet. And then as it zooms in a little closer, that's definitely a photo on the internet. We zoom in. I thought this transition was kind of cool. I know that like the camera movement, I wasn't happy with at the time. Now it's not that big of a deal to me. What I did there is I transitioned to a different thumbprint, which had already been lined up. So the camera movement was only because I couldn't figure out how to keep the camera stable while I was transitioning all the images together. But I took this image and I created a height map out of it. So I really crunched the lights and the darks so it looked like a black and white image. And then I threw that in a 3D software. So eventually it transitions to a 3D model in here. And then it zooms way into pink, which is an easy, kind of lazy transition. And then back to the 3D model where I had made a COVID-19 virus that dies as it zooms out and shows this epic shot of all the little virus particles. There's the thumb, there's the bubbles. Boom. Wash your hands. I think that video took me about a week to make with my goofy little laptop. Yeah, that was a lot of fun.
For all of our fans who happen to be effects nerds, like our producers, we asked Caleb to give us a digital effects lesson on how he managed to create the explosion in the high-rise apartment earlier in the episode.
All right, so here's the explosion that I made for the documentary. So here's the footage of the building that they gave me, hoping that I would be able to make a convincing explosion out of it. And the first thing that I did is I brought it into my 3D software because I thought I could simulate a 3D cool looking effect that would match what we were looking for. So the first thing I did once I brought it into the 3D software is I went online and I found a 3D modeled building that I thought kind of lined up or matched the one that was in the footage. This one right here. And then I separated the glass windows from wherever I wanted the explosion to come from. And I broke it into little chunks. So you can see all the little chunks that break off. And this is actually where it shatters. So after I simulated that, it looks a little like this. That's pretty cool, but not completely convincing. So I needed to add a real explosion after that. You can't just have glass shatter and have it come from nowhere. So here's the explosion that I simulated. Then I added some pyro trails. So some smoke trails that trail behind some of the debris that fly off of the explosion, just to make it look a little bit cooler. And then lastly, I added some fire that would come off of one of the floors just to make it look like there was a little bit of residual aftermath from the explosion that had just happened. I brought it into this software, which is Nuke. It's kind of like movie Photoshop. And what I do in here is I grab the elements that I made in the 3D software and I Photoshop it into the footage. So I might resize it so it matches the size of the footage. I remove some elements that I didn't like from it. I went back and I simulated some extra debris. And so I added that in there too. The debris that was originally in there wasn't quite filling up the explosion the way that I wanted it to. So I thought simulating a bunch of little tiny bits might make it look a little bit more realistic. I think it made it a little bit more convincing. So here's my debris. Then I added one of my favorite things, which is motion blur. Motion blur is a little tricky to figure out at first, but it makes it look a lot more realistic. Then I went down the line coloring things to make sure that the glass fit the color that it was supposed to be in the footage, and adding things like other explosions that I might have found online to fill it up a little bit more and make it look a little bit more convincing. And you can't go wrong with camera shake. Camera shake always sells an explosion. But I think one of the things that actually sells this explosion a lot more than you would think is the reflections. If you look close, I created some reflections on the side of the building here that I did just by doing something called keying. So keying
is when you select one particular color or one particular brightness in the footage and remove it, or you create a mask out of it. So here's the mask that I created from the blue of the windows. And even though it grabs a little bit of the building and other things in the background, I can invert it so that I'm selecting specifically the windows, and then I can just cut it out. So now I've got just the windows from the building that's in the footage. And this right here is just about all I need, maybe after a little bit of blurring, to throw the explosion over top of it. So here's that same shot with just the reflections. Now looking at it after the fact, with camera shake and reflections and everything, I think you can appreciate it a little bit more. There's always something that I would change about the things that I make. Well, I can list off a myriad of things that I would change about this effect. I hope that showing a little bit of what goes behind the curtain can help you appreciate a little bit more of what goes into the movie magic that you see. And I don't want to reveal too much of what's behind the curtain, because that takes a little bit of the magic away. So that's how I made that explosion. Lucky being able to work on projects for Disney or Netflix or anything in my industry while still being able to pursue my bigger dreams or goals of creating things that are my own. You know, I get to work on movies while making my own movies. There's no better dream than that.
In writing, they talk about the hero's journey and the virgin's promise. So the hero's journey is how the hero, the main character, overcomes all the hurdles to get to where they want to be. And the virgin's promise is where the character goes through all the trials to find something new about themselves. And I think every story has a hero's journey and a virgin's promise built within it. So be yourself and find who you are and who you want to be and keep pursuing that. But also think about where you want to be, what you want to do, and all the hurdles that you have to jump over to get there. And just do it. Follow your dreams. Be the hero in your hero's journey.
Wow, what a fascinating episode. And to think that Caleb's hero's journey all began during his childhood by adding effects to the home movies he created while growing up. Some may say a parallel journey to that of the great Steven Spielberg. And who knows, maybe Caleb's journey will lead to a similar outcome of becoming a truly celebrated and prolific filmmaker as well. If you would like to learn more about Caleb, his journey, or see his work, you can check him out on LinkedIn and on Instagram at Caleb Bannerholt. Once again, we hope you enjoyed another episode of Indie Corner BC and a glimpse of the behind-the-scenes magic of our celebrated Hollywood North. We look forward to seeing you next time, but until then, enjoy everything that Vancouver has to offer.